And I should apologize that I'm in the dark. I'm up at our cabin, which is a couple hours north of Montreal, and the way the lighting's set up, I'm either in the dark or there's a big glow behind me. It looks like the sun, and it's all you'd see. So I haven't worked that one out yet. But I have to. The good news is it's quite warm today here. It was 0 degrees here, which is the warmest we've seen in several months. Um, Warm and sunny. So in any case, for today, I'll talk a little bit about our organization, the Scleroderma Patient Centered Intervention Network, or SPIN. What Talk about what mental health is and what is mental illness, what the difference is. And that's a really important distinction to think about. I'll talk about what we know about mental health and mental illness in scleroderma, including during COVID-19, what's happened, and also some things you can do to support positive mental health. I think one thing we do know, these are certainly challenging times for everybody. Just as a quick disclosure, and I do this on my talks, I want to disclose it. All the funding that we get is through public organizations. Most of it from like the Canadian Institute of Health Research, and also we're super grateful for all our patient organization partners who help support us in different ways. So we don't have any pharmaceutical other industry funding, and I should take the opportunity to thank the several state organizations here in Australia, including Scleroderma Victoria, for supporting what we do. It really keeps us going and let's lay the groundwork for some of the really big projects we're able to do them later. So we began, I think, in around 2018. Marilyn Singer met with us in Bordeaux at the World Scleroderma Congress, and we began to work with some of the different organizations, including Scleroderma Victoria. And very quickly, your group's become a wonderful partner. So we enjoy working with you. We've worked with, Louise mentioned, with a number of people from the group, and so hopefully we'll keep doing that. So what does SPIN do? We came together about 10 years ago, and about a lot's happened since then. But about that time, not a lot had been done in rare diseases at all. It's in particular in scleroderma, and obviously the experience of living with a rare disease, people have talked about. I know when I was just before I got on, someone was saying she was just diagnosed and hadn't even heard of the disease. So that's a pretty common experience, and I think a lot of it in some ways is being alone. You're alone because you don't know what your disease is. Many other people don't know, and maybe even your doctor doesn't know, or maybe even it took a long time to get a diagnosis because your doctor wasn't so aware of it. And in common, that loneliness extends to having the resources you need. So in many common diseases, if you have cardiovascular disease or rheumatoid arthritis, you have all sorts of supports. You have patient education and information, good physical rehabilitation, self-management or tools to better cope with the disease, or psychological support that's geared towards living with your disease. But none of this was there for anybody with scleroderma not so many years ago. And we got together around 2010 or 2011 with a bunch of people with scleroderma, key researchers from a number of countries, and thought that why not us? Why can't we do something about this? And so this is where SPIN came from, those meetings, and basically our mission that came out of this is to develop, test, and disseminate, or get out to people, free, accessible tools to help live better with scleroderma. So how do we do that? If you think about a rare disease like scleroderma, there aren't many people in one place. We've really been grounded in the idea that we all have to work together. So we have an international groups, and Scleroderma Victoria, Scleroderma Australia have become a really big part of that. We work very closely with patient organizations. That we're not anything without our patient organization partnerships. And we do things online. We started out putting programs online. Now we've moved to video conference. Another thing we do that was mentioned, we have a cohort. So a cohort means we have people like yourselves, and if you're interested in joining, we'd love to have you, that help us. We answer questions and provide data on experiences you're having. That helps us better understand what the experiences you are having, what are priorities, so we can target the right problems and target tools to help address them. So I said that we work, our basis of what we do is working with patient organizations, and we have really, really critical partners here. And because you'll see across the bottom, all of our partners in Australia. So thanks to you for working with us. And there's lots of ways to get involved. So again, Louise was saying at the beginning, we're a patient researcher clinician collaboration. And we started many years ago. We had a patient advisory board of about 8 people that came together and were involved in everything we did. And we've expanded a lot since then. I think it's important that every time we start a new project, we have a project specific advisory team. So we there's over 30, probably that's a little bit old, probably over 40 or 50 people with scleroderma involved on a different team. So we just formed a team to look more closely at pain. Um, Today we met with a group that wants to look at oral health. And that's something that patients prioritize. So we're doing to form a team. So keep your eye out. What we do is we post on social media. So if you're interested in being involved, we'd love to have you as an advisor. So we meet with us, go over what we're talking about doing, um, provide your input based on your experiences. Um, Recently, we merged our advisory board with our overall steering committee. We thought, why should the people with scleroderma be on a different advisory board than the scientists? So we all put that all together in one. And starting actually in the next month or two, we're going to start a dedicated patient engagement program. We actually have a postdoctoral fellow who's trying to navigate COVID immigration protocols and arrive in Canada from Australia, actually, to from Perth to come work with us, as long with one of my doctoral students. And I don't know if she's really navigating immigration protocols or just saw photos of our winters and is hoping to arrive in June, which might not be a bad idea. And as I said in our steering committee, you'll see here there's people with scleroderma and scientists around the world. And Amanda is one of our members, so thanks Amanda for working with us. It's a really key link between our organization and yours. And we talked about, Louise also mentioned people being involved. This was our spin chat team. This was our trial that we did in the beginning of COVID. You'll see how many people from around the world came. I think people from 13 countries were involved in this in some way or another. In the top center, there was Louise, who had graduated from the Spin Sled program and then moderated one of our groups and did a fantastic job. So thanks, Louise for that. And we mentioned a cohort. So we have people with from 7 countries and about 2,000 people now that sign up through their doctors. Their rheumatologists can also sign up directly by contacting us. And we collect, what that involves is meaning that every 3 months we send you an email and say, with a link to go online. And we have different sets of questionnaires about different experiences, whether it be um, mobility or mental health or work or whatever we're studying at the time, or oral health, that you can provide data that's really important. You submit it online, and then we use these data for planning and to decide what kind of interventions we should work on. And you'll see we have about 50 sites around the world, and we have 2 sites in Australia, including Melbourne, where some of you know Dr. Mandy Nickpour, who leads our group in Melbourne here. So mental health is in the news a lot. What is mental health? And in essence, your mental health is, as I have written here, it's your ability to think, feel, and act in ways that make your life enjoyable and let you cope with challenges that come your way. So you can deal effectively with problems. You can enjoy people around you, enjoy the things you like to do, and get the best out of life. That's broadly or maybe vaguely what mental health is. So another way to put it, it's a positive sense of emotional and spiritual well-being. It lets you to enjoy your well-being as you and related to culture, equity, justice, and dignity. And so I think that it's important to keep track of mental health is something that we all experience every day at different levels of it. We have good days and bad days, uh, days that leave us feeling happier and more content, days that leave us down in the dumps. So we all have mental health across the spectrum, and we all at some point deal with mental health issues. Which means like that our capacities aren't what they like to do. We make if a bad day, we might make bad decisions. We might lash out at people around us. Um, Whatever we might do, we're all different how we deal with it, and we don't enjoy things as much or interaction. But those are still part of just our mental health across the spectrum, which is similar but not the same thing as mental illness or mental disorder. In that That comes about when we're talking about things like depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. I think the biggest difference between having bad, you know, mental health days and mental illness is that this is a point when you're not able to cope, when things are too big, too bad, and things kind of stop for you. And those are the kind of time when it's time to see someone professionally. Um, why am I taking the time to point these out? So mental health issues. You have bad days; they come and go. Um, but generally, we can cope with things. Whereas with mental illness or mental disorders, time that when it's time to see a doctor, are things again when you're not coping. The bad days stick there and don't go away, and we can't take on the challenge that faces today or tomorrow or the next day. And one reason I'm bringing this up is because there've been a couple different things that have been happening over the last, say, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. One of them is that there has been in the past a lot of stigma about mental illness or bad mental health, and people who would have really benefited from seeing somebody usually weren't, and that's taken a huge toll on people's well-being, to have untreated mental illness. So there have really been campaigns to destigmatize mental illness, and ensure that it's okay, that it affects many of us at different times. It affects people we know, and it's important to get help. And that's been a really positive development. At the same time, there's been a kind of merging of mental health and mental illness, where people in my field, through exaggeration of burden, through exaggeration of my need, have kind of brought these two things together. And I think it's really important to keep in mind they are very different. So we can all have struggles. We can all have uh, huge barriers in front of us. We can all have really unpleasant experiences, but that's different from not being able to cope with them, which is when it becomes a mental illness. And so it's important to keep those apart, and figure out what we're talking about. So what do we know about scleroderma and mental health, and what have studies shown us here? And there's not a lot of good studies on mental health and scleroderma, but I can show you a couple of them, and some of the results might be a little bit surprising to you. Maybe they won't be. So this we did a study, and this is related to mental disorder. There's a major depressive disorder. So a major depressive disorder means that you're basically so depressed that you're not able to function, that you're not able to do your job as you like, or interact or enjoy the things you'd like to do. You might have you might have just feelings of being sad all the time. Usually it comes with things like overly negative thinking, that you think you're in a lot worse shape than you are, or not good enough. There's often people experience depression through their bodies, particularly us men. Often that is the way we feel it. We're just tired or grumpy, um, not sleeping well. But in any case, they're diagnostic criteria to figure out when someone has this disorder. And we did a study in Canada about 8 years ago now, and we looked at how many people, what percentage of people with scleroderma, there were about over 300 people in our study, had major depression in the last 30 days. So they meet criteria in the last 30 days. How many had it sometime in the last 12 months or last year, and how many had ever had it? And you'll see that. What do you see here? You see that at any given time, so in the last 30 days, only about 4% of people with scleroderma are experiencing a mental depression in terms of mental illness or mental disorder, which is high. It's higher than the general population, about 2%. But it's still, the take home is that most people with scleroderma don't have depression at any given time point. Even in the last 12 months, about 10 people experience a depression that really becomes too much to deal with at some point, which is again about double in the general population. But most people don't. Um, what is the so having depression sometime in your life? That tells us that you know a lot of us, almost 25% of us, will be depressed at some point, which is more. But usually, it also goes away, right? And so, I think what one thing that's important to think about in this is that many people assume, or that if you have or living with scleroderma with everything you're facing, you must have mental illness or mental disorder go with it. And I think that this is showing that's not actually true. That some people do it, and some people do when it goes away, and some people do it other times. But for the most part, you know, people are dealing with a lot living with this disease, as you all know, and I know from witnessing, but not, it's a lot that you could, the burdens that I face, the challenges, the healthcare challenges, but most people are coping pretty resiliently with a lot of challenges and a lot of hardships, which is different from this. And what you know, this was a follow-up to that study we did, and the only thing I think to take away here is that this is a little bit of graphic of people in the study that most people. So out of all the people in the study we did, most people never had. We did assessments with people, and then we did a month later. So most people didn't have depression either of those time points. That's the blue part. Out of about 309 people, about only 3 people had depression both times. Now and a month later, and then there are about 9 people had it first time point, not the second time, and 13 the vice versa. So again, this tells you that again at any given time point, most people are dealing admirably with or resiliently with what they're facing. But some people do need some help at some point, and when they do need help, it's most people it's not a steady state. It usually comes and goes, and they're able to find a way to cope. So what happened in during COVID? And this is I can't, all the superlatives that you can describe. This is probably the biggest event in many of our lifetimes on a societal level. So when COVID started, we, as Louise mentioned, we geared up to do a couple of things. We signed people up with a new cohort because we wanted to collect data much more quickly. Our cohort, regular cohort, people provide data every 3 to 6 months, and we wanted to find out what's happening to people right away and much more rapidly. So we're assessing people with every 2 weeks at the beginning, and now every 4 months. And some of you are in the cohort, and thanks for participating in that. But this is the first study in any disease that's really assessed mental health so quickly, rapidly across the pandemic for people. And so we had about 435 people who were in a regular spin cohort. So we had data from them from prior to the cohort. It was a pretty typical group of people with scleroderma. So about the average age of 57, and almost 90% were women. They about 12 years since they were diagnosed. About half people were using immunosuppressant drugs, which was really frightening for people at the beginning of this. And about a third had lung disease. And by the way, the reason you're not seeing Australia in this one is because the Australia centers came in right about the time COVID started, so we really didn't have data from people pre-COVID from Australian centers. But now we have ongoing data from people here. When we did this, we didn't have those pre-COVID data. What did we find? It's interesting when we do our projects, as I mentioned before, we have an advisory team. So we met with a group of patients before we started this and designed our project. Both our study of what was happening with mental health and our intervention, or our program that we launched to try to help people cope with it. And the people with scleroderma that were advising us said, it's not going to be an issue of depression. We're pretty good at dealing with isolation and loneliness and things like that that comes with our disease. But people are really fearful about what might happen, due to lung disease and immunosuppressants and the general. Some people are generally fragile, not everybody, but some. So what did we find? They were dead on. They knew what was going to happen. Also, we measured. If you look here on these graphs I'm showing, the dot at the left on the anxiety score graph on the left is prior to COVID. In 50 here, that number is about what the general population level is. So people's scleroderma a tiny bit higher, not as much as you'd suspect, a couple of points higher, which isn't very much generally. But then when COVID started, that first time point, anxiety launched upwards right away, very quickly. But what happened after that? And this might be surprising to some people, but it came back down. So over the first summer, these are every 2 weeks and so forth. This graph goes out about till March of 2021. We have data now, January 2021, sorry. We have data now up to about now, and this stayed low. What happened is that people's anxiety levels returned down to normal levels, um, and they stayed that way. And their depression scores is a different measure, so the measure numbers are a little bit different. But you can see here it didn't change very much. So the people on our advisory team were exactly right. That didn't seem to be impacted um, by the pandemic. So I mean, in essence, after initial spike, people seem to be doing okay. But one thing that's important to note, though, that these results are averages, so they don't represent anybody, any person per se. Um, and one thing I worry about a little bit with these results, I think that COVID's kind of shaken up the bottle here, shaking because for some people, we're all worried and we're all concerned and we're all devastated by some of the losses we face. But some people haven't experienced. The people haven't experienced the same way. Some people's stress is way down. Some people have had to commute. People I've talked about in my research institute that are, work the phones or administrative jobs that say, I'm working at home now. I cut out 2.5 hours of total commute every day. I'm with my kids and my partners. Um, embarrassed to say it, but this is I feel much better off now. So I think there's some of that going on, but there's also some people that are much worse. So I think we have to remember that looking at that on average we haven't seen much of a difference, but I suspect that there are some people have had it much worse and some people have had it much better, which averages out to not being much of a change. So how does that compare to what you're hearing in the news? I think the photo at the top here is a photo of a tsunami. Um, and that word was used a lot here. There's a earthquake followed by a tsunami. So if the pandemic and the virus is the earthquake, there was going to be a mental health tsunami, and that was almost understood to be the case that was going to happen, and everyone was predicting disasters. But I think what we've learned over the course of this is that what we're seeing in scleroderma was actually pretty common across the board. That when you actually look at data, good data, that that's pretty typical. That things have settled down a lot. Now that doesn't always get into the news because what happens in the news, our news moves very quickly and people need stories. So they talk about, high numbers, but those high numbers are usually coming from people when they measure something just right now or during the pandemic and they decide these are high numbers. I have a couple of teams I manage, but my other team that actually reviews mental health evidence has done it. We've reviewed over 80,000 published articles to find the ones that have useful data. And we've actually compared studies that have data from before the pandemic and then during the pandemic in general large national populations and probably 80 or 100 studies now, and we've seen essentially the same thing. So this comes back to what we're talking about. What is mental health and the daily struggles we face versus mental illness. And again, the same thing. We're seeing that if you ask people, I think this is part of the reason it's gotten in the news so much. If you ask people questions like, how much are you struggling due to COVID now, right now? And then everyone, of course, is struggling because we all are at different degrees, and we answer that we are. But if you actually measure things like depression or anxiety now, and you have measures for people from before the pandemic, they really haven't changed very much, which I think is heartening because again, although things are different for different people, that that as a there's a lot of resilience out there, and I think that doesn't make such a story. But there is a lot of resilience out there, and people are really hanging in there. And again, not everybody. There are individual differences, difference between people, difference between day to day for all of us. But but generally, on average, people are hanging in there and coping pretty well with this terrible, a terrible global experience. So we'll go through the last thing to go through is what are some things that maybe you can consider doing because although I think that one of the things I wanted to point out at the beginning is that, well, most people with scleroderma aren't experiencing something that really requires medical help or psychological or psychiatric help. There are a lot of struggles out there for living with this disease. So, mental health is going to be a challenge, and there are things that you can do to have, better days or more better days than worse days, and that's important to keep in mind. So some of what I'll show are a brief snapshot of some of the things that we did in our program at the beginning of the pandemic. And I'd be happy if we have more resources. I'd be happy to send people. You're welcome to email me or get in touch with me through Amanda or Louise. So what are important things to do that can be helpful. And this is all the time. So this slide here talks about information management, and this has been something that, especially at the beginning of COVID, when we're just bombarded by information. And again, I think if you watch the news, and I sometimes can't really stomach watching much of the news anymore or reading much, because it's all based on the attention, our attention span now, and how fast things move. The news stories are changing almost hourly, and so there's a lot of dramatic attention grabbing news out there. And if you're following the pandemic, it can be just too much and too unbearable. And now another thing we're coping with is the kind of information. So there's all sorts of things being said, and, you know, and some of it's just frankly bonkers. So one of the first things to really taking care of your mental health is figuring out the kind of information you need, and really maybe decide how much time you're gonna watch the news, and don't get sucked into it. Use reliable and credible sources to obtain your information. So, the World Health Organization, or your government websites, or researchers you trust might have good information. And it's kind of important to try to turn off and not always talk about I think the health crisis. And believe me, it can be carried. It can get carried away. Right now in Canada, we're dealing with this. I don't know what you're going to call it, either occupation or protest or whatever going on in our capital in Ottawa and some of the borders. So it can be a little overwhelming if you let yourself go there. But it's important to kind of limit what you're getting from the news and what's useful to you, and what's just scary and frightening and tension grabbing, which does get you to click on many times on websites, and people get money the more times you click. But figuring out how helpful it is to you is important. So focus on positive things as much as you can, and find time to do things you like. So simple information, very simple, but maybe harder to do, but simple advice. And it's not just the pandemic, but also with scleroderma. I mean, and this has come up again, just from, I got on literally 2 or 3 minutes before I was coming on and heard the last end of the conversation, but people talking about getting information, what's out there. And all sorts of things get said, and there's not a lot of information that's easy to obtain. So it's really important to find a trusted site, trust information. And you guys, I've gotten to know your organization, people in the organization, and your websites. You have really, really great information. I mean, I just had a meeting today with Matthew and Tammy, who are two dentists. I know I'm not remembering their last names right now, but I found them because I was reading through some of the resources you have, and they have an outstanding section on oral health in scleroderma. And this is just the front top of the page you have there. And there's many more resources here. But I think a good idea is start with your organization. And I promise I'm not saying this just because I was invited here to your organization, but is really an exemplar in the kind of information provided. It's very, very good evidence-based information. And start there. I mean, it's not. There are other ones too. The Scleroderma Foundation in the U.S. has some pretty good information, and there's some researchers like Johns Hopkins, for instance, Fred Wigley and Laura Hummers run that site. They have wonderful patient information. So figure out where you want to go and where you want to get your information. It's really a important aspect of mental health. Information these days is all around us, within us, all the time, and so don't let it overrun you. Use it as best you can. What else can you do to sustain mental health and have positive mental health? Get up and move around. And we won't go into that much more than that. It can be challenging to have scleroderma and get up and move around. But this has actually been shown in study after study that one of the biggest associations with positive mental health is moving. And it's been so easy to sit and not do that in the pandemic. I know one of the things I do is I take my dogs out every day for an hour and a half in the morning and walking them. I didn't see it. It's on the video I shot for this. When it was minus 33, we go out and we do our walk. And that's probably one of the most important things I do for my head in clearing it. And people like different things. People like to go to gyms. People might like to do yoga or swim. Well, whatever it makes sense, make sure you get up and move around. One of the worst things you can do for your mental health is to sit and stay inside. Get out and get some sun, move your body around is really, really critical. Um, and we just a quick, I don't know if it's a plug or sharing. There's different kinds of exercise. We when we finish the programs or tools I'm talking about, we do put them online. And here's the website. And I think Amanda and Louise said they're going to distribute our slides here, so you'll have this website. But you can see here you can log in and use the tools we have. And one of them is a nice hand exercise program. So it's not aerobic exercise to get going, but they are some nice, a really nice program that was developed out of our a team that works with us from Paris, um, and among others that led us and put this together. It's just one form of doing some exercises and keeping at least your hands moving every day. How else can you take care of your mental health? You know, make sure you're around people, and I think people are good at this now. But there's different ways, so FaceTime or Skyping or Google Hangouts or anything else. But make sure you make time. Depending what's going on in your life right now, it can be really easy to not see anybody else. If that's an entire day, by yourself or without getting out. But this is really important. So you might, even if you have to schedule it, which you didn't have to do maybe before the pandemic, do these kind of things. Um, those were just touching base individually, but you also have a wonderful support group mechanism here in Scleroderma, Victoria. So, and this is just the left-hand side here is just the front part of the page. If you click on your support groups, you'll see there are 8 or 10, I think it was about 8 or 10 support groups that are going throughout your state with contact information. So support groups, and they're not for everybody, but a lot of people, really benefit from them. They're a good way to get in touch with people who share some of your experiences, and who are there to support each other. And that's one of the things that scleroderma is fairly unique. That there's support groups are really, really a big part of what all the organizations do, whether it be in Canada, United States, Australia. And so one of the biggest things we did going way back was when we started meeting with patient organizations in Canada. They said, what about our support groups? We ask a lot of our people in our support groups, and we don't provide enough. And we spent 8 or 9 years developing our spin sled program, and we recently finished a test of that where it was super successful in terms of people learn and gain good skills. And we put together a really nice program with a lot of time in it. And then we had a wonderful facilitator from the state of Michigan, in the United States, named Laura Diaz, who just did a great job with people and still is running these programs. So I think there were about 6 people from Victoria who have gone through the program. And if there are others, we're still doing the training and it's still out there. But your support groups here in Victoria are a really good option and really, really can help with your daily kind of tools for positive mental health. What else? What else can you do? So worry is a big thing right now. Um, and we all experience it, differently. You can experience worry because we have thoughts running through our head all the time. It can just kind of feel like this heavy, yucky, feeling there that something's wrong and you're not sure what. We can experience it by avoiding things that we need to, but it's right now there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the world, and so I think worry is a big thing to try to cope with. And this is, and we have more materials, and I'm happy to share them with people. But so let's give a brief overview here. And I'm not suggesting that just a couple of notes is going to solve big problems, but what we do usually do when we work with people on worry is to help figure out, what are real problem worries. That's really important for all of us. I in my own life, my family and my work and all the other things. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong, and I can have the tendency to have them all floating through. Real problems versus hypothetical means sorting out, what is really going to happen I need to solve versus what is something that's possible, but probably not going to happen. And even if it did happen in the future, there's nothing I can do about it now. Or often those kind of take down the kind of catastrophizing too. What if everyone pulls out of one of our projects and this because something, there's a disagreement? Well, that's probably hypothetical and not really going to happen. So how can I really solve a problem about some kind of disagreement in a group versus hypothetical of all the bad things that could happen if everybody goes to extremes about it. So, so we really try to sort out, and problem solve about what what I'm worrying about. Is this a problem I can actually do something about? And if it's not, try to let go and focus on something that's important right now. Is it something I can do something about? Well, if there's a green arrow there, it says it is. Well, what can I do? Can I do something about it now? And then I do it and then let it go. And if I can't, then I can plan for when I can do it and try to let it go. But trying to figure out and focus on what I can do something about now. Because the rest of the stuff is probably hypothetical. If you're not planning and actually planning we can act, it's important to let go of the worrying. And another thing that can be helpful, and people who went through the Spin Chat program were Danielle Rice, was a wonderful young psychologist who presented this material. And another thing that's helpful is actually, I find actually this is something that helps me a lot. Is just scheduling worry time. So all the things that are worrying us, just keep a notepad. And this is a little grid that Danielle put together. What's the thought? How can I do something about it? And then what are the actions I can have? But something that's actually helpful is saying that, I'm going to take care of all these things at 5 o'clock today, and actually scheduling on a time when you're going to deal with these things. And what I find that does for me, and I think it does for other people too, is that if something's kind of a hypothetical worry or not something you're actually going to problem solve, and I start to put it on my list to come back and think about, I don't even put it on my list. I'm not going to take time later to deal with it. And you move and it goes away. And it's a really quick trigger that this is probably something I don't need to be worrying about. But then there are sometimes things I do need to plan for and think about, and I have a time to do that. But just knowing that I'm going to put them aside to later, and I have to write down which ones I'm going to think about later and plan for, helps me sort out which things I should be spending time planning for and which things I should probably let go because they're not worth coming back to in 6 or 7 hours. And then finally, the last strategy I'll talk about might be helpful. Who doesn't like relaxation, right? Um, but it's actually a really, really good mental health tool, particularly with worry. Is training yourself to relax. And again, I have a link here at the top here on the strategy. So if you actually go to that link and click on it, we have a little recording that you can use. But one of the a really really helpful exercise is just breathing and focused breathing. And by doing this and focusing on your breath, some people might call it meditation, others just guided, focusing on your breathing. By focusing on your breathing, it physiologically calms your system down. And anxiety is physiological, meaning that you feel it in your body. You feel the tenseness and the jiggling and the nerves. And literally, they're incompatible to be calmly focusing on your breath and having that other stuff going on. So, and some of these instructions say, breathe in through your nose and breathe out for count of two. Breathing in through your nose might be more difficult for some people than others, depending on how well you breathe. But you don't have to do those kind of things. But if you just take a few minutes to lie down or sit down, whatever you want to do, close your eyes and focus on your breath and take yourself away. And it takes some work to do that. It takes actually some focus to focus on your breath. Your mind starts to drift off, and just bring it back and focus on your breathing. And again, there's a exercise at the top if you click there that we have to do that, to look at this. And I'm actually happy to share more materials with people as well. And another exercise it just does the same kind of thing, is just again taking your mind away from all the thoughts running through it. And there's a link on the side here for an imagery exercise that Ghassan El-Bavaki and other psychologists who worked with our team in Spin Chat put together. It's just, again, sitting back, closing your eyes, if you're comfortable doing that, and imagining somewhere that where you do feel calm and comfortable. And this stuff is kind of kooky as it might sound for some people. This really really works really nicely to kind of help us cope on a daily basis with some of the stuff we're going through. So I think that's about the time that Amanda and Louise asked me to talk about it. And I'm actually really looking forward to chatting with people. So I haven't been able to see anyone for about 45 minutes. I hope you're all still there. And I'll take my slides off, and if you're still there, we'll have a conversation